So I figured there's no better time than on my drive home from work to have a conversation about whether or not I can do this or I can imagine doing this for another 20 years. And it's something that I've been kind of kicking around, or it's just been popping into my head on my morning commute. I think being in your mid to late 40s, if you're really sort of paying attention to yourself and where you come from, what you've done in your life, I do think that it's an interesting age in the sense that you've lived long enough to, learn some lessons, to have some life experience that, I don't know, that you can kind of, I don't want to say cling to, but that you can hang on to and harness and reflect back on and learn from. But I also think what's really interesting is, for the first time in my life, I caught myself on my morning commute the other day thinking like, oh, I'm going to have to work at least 20 more years, probably 25. I'm 47, so if you're doing the math there, my fiance's parents are both retired. They're in their early to mid 60s. That's incredible. And to give you a little context, at 47 years old, I'm essentially, or technically, in my second career. I worked for almost 20 years in a prior career. I left that line of work. I left that field in my early 40s. And I was going to start over, sort of rebrand myself. I was interested in video production and freelance work, and maybe doing, work for local businesses. And it was something, I went to college for, and I always wanted to sort of work in that field. But that first career that I was in, it was something that I started when I was 22 years old, and I met a lot of great people, had a lot of wonderful opportunities, and I never left that, that field for, like I said, almost 2 decades. So as I was thinking the other day, and this is not the only time that I've thought to myself, and I want to make future videos, and there will be future videos on this concept of, being an older first-time dad. You start thinking about things that, are important to you. You start realizing that, hey, I'd like to see grandkids if I could, if that's going to happen. Like, for example, my fiance Janelle is 37 years old. If my daughter has her first kid at 37, there's a legitimate chance that I'm not around for that. So with that in mind, and I know that sounds kind of morbid, but that also I doesn't bother me, because I use that as fuel to make daily choices to help. I don't want to say ensure, because you can't be sure, but to maybe further optimize or increase the chances that I'm on this rock and I'm alive a little longer than I would be had I not made some of those choices, whether it's, fitness, whether it's activity, whether it's getting your 10,000 steps, eating a certain way, whatever. That's different. But specifically, this video, I want to center it around whether or not what I currently do is something that I could do for another 20 to 25 years. So I'm a marketing manager for an automotive dealership. I kind of wear many hats, but my primary responsibilities are essentially marketing, used car marketing, website stuff, social media stuff, going to events, and then helping out other departments, as needed. And I work with a lot of wonderful people. So this video is not about me saying that, like, I hate my job and I want to quit my job. It's more that this is the first time in my life that I'm thinking to myself, like, oh, can I do this for another 20 years? And that's just super fascinating to me. I don't know why I'm slurring my words. I promise I don't drink at work. I certainly don't drink and get behind the wheel of a car. But I don't hate my job, and I'm very blessed to have the opportunity I have. My boss is one of my oldest friends. Communication there is good. I actually went to go leave the job. I had a previous position, and my friend, essentially created a new position for me because he wanted to keep me there. All of this stuff, it's great. But at 47, you start thinking 57, you start thinking 67, and I want more for myself and for my family. And it is very interesting, since the birth of my daughter, I'm starting to ask these questions like, what does more look like? And there's a lot of questions that come with having a kid later in your life. What does healthy look like? What does being a good father look like? What does being a good father and husband look like? All things that I can assure you that at 22 years old or 25 years old, I would not be thinking about. Not to say I wouldn't be thinking about my child, but everything would be approached from such a different headspace that it's incomparable, at least in my opinion, for me, comparing me now to a younger version of me. But, not to sound morbid, gun to my head, it is hard for me to imagine being in this line of work, or I shouldn't say this line of work as much as my current role, my current position. It is difficult for me to picture and imagine staying right where I'm at. And there's nothing that says I have to, I think it's just, Janelle and I were talking recently about, she sent me like a house on Zillow, and our goal is in the next couple years to buy a house. But we're very blessed to have a living situation through one of her oldest and best friends that unexpectedly became a landlord. So it was one of those things where it was a no-brainer for everybody involved for us to move in there, save some money. But those types of conversations, coupled with having my daughter, coupled with getting married this year, at some point this fall, it really does have me kind of turning the lens of, I don't want to say what does it all mean, but sort of turning it back on myself and starting to examine everything. I historically have done this, where if I make a big life choice or a big life decision, it's not uncommon for me to feel almost like so productive and so good about coming to a decision and making a choice that I start turning that on other areas of my life. I start looking at other areas of my life where I can streamline, optimize, pivot, make a better or wiser choice. And I have to be careful, because what sometimes can happen is you just start changing things for the sake of changing things. And like I said, this video is not me, lamenting my current career path or position that I have, or anything like that. It's just more examination of not only what's important, but what's sustainable, and what can I at least, I'm learning a lot lately about this. It's simple, but it's also something that I realize that I don't do, which is this idea, and Janelle talks a lot about this, about manifesting. And to me, what that means is projecting forward and imagining yourself doing something. And I can't imagine myself doing what I am doing today at 67 years old. And I think that's kind of maybe sort of all I need to pay attention to. And then from there, make a decision about making a decision, if that makes sense. But I'm curious if there's other people out there, particularly middle-aged, no offense to anybody watching this, but I don't want to say I don't care if you're 25, but, I see videos pop up on my feed, 28-year-old dad doing XYZ. That's awesome. I'm not coming down on any of that. I didn't make those choices when I was 28. You know, I've historically lived my life like a lot of people tell you you should, which is life is short. You don't know what could happen tomorrow. You know, and I think the problem is, and I'm going to end this video with this. My problem with that, and one of the things that I will definitely sit my daughter down and talk to her about when she's much older, is I think the intent behind the sayings like life is short and the intent, you know, do what you love, and I am not shitting on the phrases themselves. I think unfortunately what happens is for certain people, and I'm going to include myself in this, when you start thinking about living life as if it could end tomorrow, you know, I could get hit by a bus next week, so what choice should I make today? Say yes more than you say no, you know, these types of things. And it's like, if you're not careful, you can start to be impulsive and you can start to make short-sighted decisions exclusively because your short-term gratification is going to take precedent over, you know, long-term stability or long-term happiness, potentially. My point is, what I want to talk to my daughter about someday is a balanced approach to these types of decisions. You know, in Hollywood, there's that famous saying, or actually it's not just in Hollywood, but, you know, artists do this where it's like, especially in the movie business, where it's like one for them, one for me. You know, actors do this all the time, right? Make a blockbuster so you can get the cachet, then go make the independent film that you actually want to make. And I think decisions for your life, like a career, like, you know, investing, like saving money, like setting yourself up, studying, whatever it is, I think making decisions like what makes me happy this weekend and what is going to be useful to me in 20 or 30 years. And what I mean by that is not to sound overly dramatic, but just if I don't know, let's just say I buy a camera because I want to make videos. Well, maybe you take the money you spent on the camera, you know, and then you double it and you take half of that and then you put something in like a high yield savings account, or you invest it in something that you're not going to touch. And that's just a simple sort of like one for one, you know, dollar to dollar situation. But maybe you say, hey, I'm going to take the summer and I'm going to, you know, travel Europe, but I'm enrolled in classes in September and I'm going to finish out my degree. You know, so you're giving yourself that short-term excitement with an eye toward, you know, the future. Because I heard somebody say this once, and this is where I'll end things, and I thought this was fascinating, was that, you know, they use the phrase, life is short until it's not. You know, and I hope that I live to beyond 90 years old. I hope that it'd be super cool if I had another 47 years on this planet. And maybe I do. But I've made decisions in my life, maybe 6 or 7 out of 10 times, as if I could die tomorrow. And that's part of the reason, and I'm not blaming it, but it's part of the reason why I'm on my second career and not sitting here in my first career, even higher up the food chain, with my eye on a finish line going, man, in my mid-60s, it's going to be so cool to retire and watch my daughter as a young woman maybe, you know, start a family, enter her career, and just crush it. Whereas now I'm like, can I do this for 20 more years? All right. I just wanted to banty that about a little bit. I actually thought the drive home would be a perfect time for it. Just because, like I said, these are thoughts and things that are popping up routinely on my drive to work lately. So when I'm not blasting ridiculously loud heavy metal. All right, that's all I got.